Hey, I'm not really sure how to start this, since I've never posted anything online before, but I've been feeling like I need to get some things off my chest. I figured this might be a good place to write down what's been going on. Maybe I'm looking for advice, or maybe I just need to say it out loud somewhere. Anyway, here goes. It's been 2 weeks since I adopted him. I guess I should start at the beginning. The process of adoption isn't something you just dive into without thinking about it. I mean, it wasn't like I woke up one morning and decided to bring a kid into my life on a whim. It had been years of thinking, contemplating, going back and forth. I never really had much of a family growing up, so the thought of adopting, giving someone else that chance at a real home, well, it felt right. It was the least I could do, right? There are so many kids out there who don't get that chance, who grow up bouncing between homes, never knowing what stability feels like. I wasn't looking for anything specific. Boy or girl, younger or older, it didn't really matter to me. What I wanted was to connect, to feel that click, you know? But when I met him at the orphanage, there was something that drew me in immediately. I'm not going to sit here and say it was love at first sight, because that's not what this is. It wasn't about love, it was more. Curiosity. He stood apart from the other kids, not in the corner or anything dramatic like that, but in the way he carried himself. The other kids were loud, running around, playing games, yelling, laughing, but not him. He was just standing there, staring out the window, watching the rain hit the glass. His hands were tucked into the pockets of this oversized coat that practically swallowed him whole in his face. His face was so still, like he wasn't really there, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. At first, I wasn't sure if I should approach him. I mean, the last thing a kid like that needs is some stranger swooping in to make things awkward, right? But something about him, I don't know, it pulled me in. So I walked over, took a deep breath, and introduced myself. He didn't look at me at first. Not really. His eyes sort of flicked in my direction, but he didn't turn his head and he didn't speak. I felt that awkward pit open up in my stomach, that voice telling me I was probably making things worse. But then, just as I was about to leave him alone, he spoke. He told me in a quiet voice that he used to live in a place like this a long time ago. I wasn't sure what to say. The way he said it was almost eerie. It didn't match his age, which couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. He finally turned to look at me, his eyes this deep, dark brown, like they could see straight through me. I asked him, half joking, whether he wanted to get out of here, trying to ease the weird tension that had suddenly built up between us. He didn't smile, just stared. Then he nodded. I think that was the moment when I knew I was going to adopt him. I didn't ask him his name. It didn't feel important at the time. It was like he was already part of my life somehow, and the formalities didn't matter. Of course, the orphanage staff gave me the rundown later. His name, his age, the basic background stuff they tell you. Nothing too out of the ordinary, except, well, they didn't seem to know much about his history. Apparently, he'd been dropped off at the orphanage a year or so ago by someone claiming to be a relative, but there wasn't any paperwork, nothing concrete to back up the claim. No one had come looking for him since. They said he didn't talk much about his past, and they hadn't pressed him for details. Kids in the system sometimes block out trauma, they said. It wasn't uncommon. They told me not to worry. So, I didn't. The process was faster than I expected, honestly. Maybe it was the way he just seemed to fit. He didn't have any behavioral issues, no red flags, nothing that made them hesitate. And I wasn't exactly a rookie at this point. Having worked with kids before, they trusted me. Within a few weeks, he was coming home with me. I remember that first night so clearly. You'd think there would be some big emotional moment, some dramatic change when you bring a child into your home for the first time, but it wasn't like that at all. It was quiet. Too quiet, maybe. He didn't say much as we drove back to my place. just stared out the window like he had been when I first met him. I tried to make small talk, asking him if he liked the city and if he had any favorite foods, favorite games, and things like that. His answers were short, almost clipped, and it was clear he wasn't interested in chatting. I figured he needed time to adjust, so I didn't push. When we got home, I showed him his room. I had set it up pretty nicely, I thought. Fresh paint, new sheets, some toys and books I thought he might like. But he barely even looked at it. Just put his stuff down and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. Hovering in the doorway like an idiot, I asked if he was hungry or thirsty and whether he needed anything. He just shook his head. I then let him know that he could ask for anything and that he didn't have to be shy. But he didn't respond. He just sat there like he was waiting for something, though I couldn't figure out what. It was unsettling, but I chalked it up to the new environment. The kid needed time. Anyone would. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the strange, heavy silence that seemed to follow him everywhere. I'd heard stories about kids in the system being closed off and mistrustful of new people, but this felt different. It wasn't that he didn't trust me. He didn't seem to care one way or the other, like he was detached from everything, even himself. Around 2 a.m. is when I heard it, a whisper. At first, I thought I was dreaming. You know that weird half-asleep state where sounds blend with dreams and you can't tell what's real. It was like that, but then it came again, clearer this time. It was a voice, low, almost a hiss, coming from somewhere down the hall. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear. There it was again, a soft, murmuring voice. I couldn't make out the words, but it was unmistakable. My first thought was that the boy was talking in his sleep, maybe having a nightmare. I threw on my robe and crept out into the hall, careful not to make any noise. As I approached his room, the whispering stopped. I hesitated outside his door, hand hovering over the doorknob, feeling like I was intruding on something private. But I had to know he was okay, so I slowly pushed the door open. He was sitting up in bed, his eyes wide open, staring directly at the wall in front of him. As I peeked my head in, I whispered to him, asking whether he was okay. He didn't respond, didn't blink, just sat there, completely still, his gaze fixed on some invisible point in front of him. My skin prickled, and I felt that strange sensation, the same one I'd felt at the orphanage when I first saw him. I walked over to the bed and knelt down beside him, trying to snap him out of whatever trance he seemed to be in. I tried gently shaking his shoulder and quietly calling out to him, hoping it would help. His head snapped toward me so fast that I jumped. For a split second, his eyes looked wrong, darker than before and hollow. But then they blinked, and he was back. The boy I'd brought home, sitting in front of me, rubbing his eyes like he'd just woken up. I asked him if he had a bad dream, whilst keeping my voice steady even though my heart was racing. He shook his head. I inquired if he heard something like a voice or a weird noise. But he responded with another shake of his head. He didn't seem afraid. If anything, he looked confused, like I was the one acting strange. I didn't push it. I told him to go back to sleep, made sure he was settled in, and left the room. But as I closed the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in there with us, watching, listening. The next morning, things were back to normal, or as normal as they could be. He was quiet, as usual, but he ate breakfast and watched TV without any fuss. I tried asking him about the night before, but he didn't seem to remember much, or if he did, he wasn't interested in talking about it. The next few days were uneventful for the most part. I'd catch him staring off into space sometimes like his mind was a million miles away, but he didn't mention anything unusual, and I didn't hear any more whispers. Still, the air in the house felt different, Heaviness lingered, like a storm cloud hanging just overhead, waiting to break. I'm not a superstitious person. I don't believe in ghosts, demons, or any of that stuff. But there's something very odd about him. Something I can't quite put into words. He never talks about his past, never mentions the orphanage, his life before. It's like he doesn't have one. Like he just appeared out of nowhere. I'm trying to give him time, to be patient. He's been through a lot, I'm sure, and I don't want to push him too hard. But I can't shake this feeling that there's more to his story than I've been told. And every night I lie awake, listening for that whisper, that voice in the dark that I can't quite hear. I don't know if I'm imagining things. Maybe it's all in my head, just nerves from the responsibility of being a parent for the first time. But there's something here, in this house, something that wasn't here before he came. I'm going to keep an eye on him. I want to believe that it's just part of the adjustment, that he'll open up eventually and things will go back to normal. But if I'm being honest, I'm not sure what normal looks like anymore. Anyway, that's it for now. I'll keep you all posted on how things go. Maybe I'm just overthinking it, or maybe there's something more going on. I guess we'll see. Signing off. All right, I'm back. Honestly, I wasn't sure if I wanted to keep posting about this. Sharing something so personal online still feels a bit weird to me, but after seeing how many people actually read and liked the last post, I was kind of shocked. I didn't expect so many of you to engage with it, and it really hit me that I'm not going through this alone. Putting everything into words actually helped last time, and I've had some time to think. A lot has happened since then, more than I even know how to process. So here I am again, with more to talk about. It's been a couple of days and I wish I could say things are getting better. But if I'm being honest, it feels like I'm sinking into something much darker. I don't even know where to begin. I guess I should start with what happened after the first night. You know, after that strange moment when I found him sitting up in bed, wide awake but not really there. I told myself it was nothing. Just a kid adjusting to a new environment, right? It's normal for him to have trouble sleeping. It's normal for him to act a little off at first. That's what I kept telling myself. I tried to push the unease away, but I can't ignore it anymore. The nightmares started on the second night. Not for me, at first anyway. It was him. I was in bed, trying to relax, but there was this strange heaviness in the air, like the room itself was holding its breath. I couldn't shake this feeling that something was wrong, even though nothing had happened yet. I was just about to drift off when I heard it. A muffled, low whimpering coming from his room. At first, I thought it was just him talking in his sleep. But as I listened closer, it turned into full-on crying. I don't know if you've ever heard a kid cry in the middle of the night, but there's something about it that sends a chill down your spine. It's primal, unsettling. I jumped out of bed and hurried to his room, fully expecting to find him curled up in a nightmare. But when I opened the door, he wasn't in bed. I swear to God, my heart stopped for a second. The bed was a mess of twisted sheets, and for a moment, I thought he had somehow wandered off. Panic gripped me. I started calling his name, checking the closet, and looking under the bed. Then, I heard the crying again, louder this time. It was coming from the corner of the room. I turned, and there he was, huddled in the corner, knees pulled to his chest, his face buried in his arms. He was shaking, his little body trembling like he'd been out in the cold for hours. I knelt next to him, keeping my voice as soft as I could, reassuring him that everything was okay and that it was just a bad dream. But he didn't respond. His sobs were quieter now, but he didn't move, didn't acknowledge that I was even in the room with him. I reached out and gently touched his shoulder, and that's when he flinched. Like I had burned him. His whole body jerked, and for a second I thought he was going to bolt. I asked whether he was okay again while shaking his shoulder. He finally lifted his head, and the look in his eyes. I don't even know how to describe it. It wasn't fear. It wasn't sadness. It was like he was completely hollow, like there was nothing behind those dark brown eyes. Just emptiness. I whispered everything was okay to him, although I was not sure if I was trying to convince him or myself. After a few moments, he slowly got up and climbed back into bed without a word. He didn't say anything. He didn't cry anymore. He just lay there, staring at the ceiling. Eventually, his eyes closed, and I went back to my own room, feeling more unsettled than I ever had before. I stayed up the rest of the night, listening for any signs of him waking up again. But the house was quiet. Too quiet, honestly. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but it wasn't. It's only gotten worse. The nightmares continued every night after that. I would wake up to the sound of him crying or muttering to himself, always huddled in that same corner of his room. Each time, it was like he wasn't fully awake, like something was pulling him away from reality, dragging him into some dark place that I couldn't reach. I asked him about it the next morning, whether he remembered having bad dreams or if there was anything bothering him. But he just shook his head, like he had no idea what I was talking about. He was distant and quiet. His responses felt mechanical, like he was going through the motions of answering me, but wasn't really present. By the fourth night, I couldn't take it anymore. I tried sitting with him, staying in his room until he fell asleep, hoping my presence would help. But even then, the crying would start after midnight, like clockwork. Always the same, always from that corner. It wasn't until the fifth night that I started having nightmares too. It sounds crazy, but it's like whatever was happening to him began bleeding into my own sleep. I don't usually have nightmares. Never have, really. But that night I dreamt of the house, except it wasn't my house. It looked the same, but there was something off about it, something dark and oppressive. In the dream, I was standing at the bottom of the stairs, and the whole house was shaking, like there was a storm tearing it apart from the inside. I called out his name, but instead of hearing his voice, I heard that same whisper. The same one I heard the first night I brought him home. It was soft at first, almost like a breeze, but then it grew louder, sharper, like nails on a chalkboard. I ran up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest, and when I reached his room, the door was slightly open. Inside, everything was dark, and I could hear that whisper again, except this time, it was coming from the walls, the floor, everywhere. I pushed the door open, and there he was, standing in the middle of the room, his back to me. He wasn't crying this time. He was just standing there, perfectly still. I called out to him, but he didn't move. I took a step closer, and that's when he turned around. His eyes were black, completely black, and his mouth was twisted into this horrible, unnatural grin. He opened his mouth to speak, but instead of words, all that came out was this high-pitched, screeching noise like metal grinding against metal. It was unbearable. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. It felt so real, like I had actually been there, in that nightmare version of my house. I lay in bed for what felt like hours, trying to shake the image of his face from my mind. But it wouldn't go away. The next morning, I felt like I was losing my grip. The nightmares didn't stop. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that house, hearing that voice, seeing him with those black eyes, that horrible smile. And every time I woke up, I could feel it. I could feel this presence, like something was watching me. I started sleeping with the lights on. I know that sounds stupid, but I couldn't help it. It was the only way I could convince myself that I was still in the real world, that the things I was seeing weren't real. But even then, the nightmares came. It wasn't just me either. I had a friend over for dinner a few days ago. We've known each other for years, and I needed someone to talk to. Someone who might help me make sense of what was happening. I didn't tell him everything, just that I was having trouble adjusting to being a parent and that the kid was having nightmares. He stayed for a few hours, and things seemed normal enough. We talked, watched TV, tried to unwind. But when he went to use the bathroom, something changed. I heard him stop in the hallway, and when I went to check on him, he was standing there, frozen, staring at the boys' room. As I walked towards him, I asked if something was wrong. He turned to look at me, and for a second, his eyes didn't seem like his. There was something cold and distant about the way he looked at me. It was like he wasn't really there. After a few moments, he seemed to return to normal, but what he said next shocked me. He flat out told me in the most direct voice possible to get rid of the boy. Naturally, I was taken aback by his words. Seeing my confusion, he reiterated his statement. I tried to laugh it off, but there was no humor in his face. He just stood there, staring at me like he didn't recognize me. I don't know how to explain it, but something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. It wasn't my friend talking. It was like something dark had taken over. After he left, I tried to brush it off, but the words kept repeating in my head. You should get rid of him. The boy had been quiet all day, staying in his room and not saying much. I didn't want to admit it, but part of me was starting to wonder if my friend was right. Maybe there was something wrong with him, something I couldn't see but could feel in every bone of my body. But how could I just give him up? What would I even tell the orphanage? That he was having nightmares? That I was having nightmares? They'd think I was losing it. And maybe I am, but I can't shake the feeling that something's coming, something I'm not prepared for. The dreams, the whispers, the way people act around him. It's all connected. I just don't know how. Not yet. It's only been a short while since I brought him home, but it feels like a lifetime. I keep telling myself that this will pass, that things will get better, but deep down, I don't believe that anymore. There's something wrong here, something dark and twisted, and I don't know how to fix it. I don't even know if it can be fixed. Anyway, I'll keep posting updates as things happen. Some of you commented on my last post, and it was honestly a relief to see that I'm not the only one who feels like something's off. A few of you mentioned looking into the boy's past more, and others suggested bringing in some help. I'm still trying to figure out what to do, but writing it all down has helped, even if it doesn't make total sense yet. Maybe by putting it out there, I can start to understand what's going on. Or maybe I just need to get it all out before it eats me alive. Either way, I'm not giving up. Not yet. Have a good night. Signing off. So, I've been thinking a lot about some of the suggestions from the comments on my last post. Many of you suggested I look deeper into the boy's history, to find out more about where he came from, his time at the orphanage, and anything that might explain what's happening. Believe me when I say, I tried. I called the orphanage again and spoke to the same social worker, but there was no new information. Every file they had on him was clean. There were no red flags, no unusual behavior, and no previous incidents. It's like he was just another kid, at least on paper. But that's just it. The more time I spend with him, the less I believe that. There's something wrong here, something they're not telling me, or something even they don't know. So I took another suggestion from you all and considered having someone else look at him. Maybe a child psychologist or someone who could understand him better than I do. It seemed like a good idea, right? That's when things got even weirder. And I didn't think that was possible. I had a friend of mine, Richard, come over last weekend. We've known each other for years, and he works with kids in a social capacity, so I figured he might be able to give me some perspective. He's not a psychologist or anything, but he's good at reading people. Well, better than me, at least. I thought maybe having another person around could help ease the tension, especially since Richard is used to handling all kinds of situations. When he got here, things seemed normal at first. The boy was quiet, as usual, sitting in the living room while Richard and I caught up. I didn't mention the nightmares right away. I figured I'd ease into it and let him spend some time with the kid first. Maybe he'd pick up on something I hadn't. We were about an hour into the visit when things started getting very strange. Richard and I were sitting in the kitchen, chatting while the boy played with a toy truck on the floor. I'd been trying to keep the conversation light, not wanting to bring up anything too heavy just yet. But then Richard suddenly went quiet, like dead silent. He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes fixed on something behind me. I turned around, half expecting to see the boy standing there, but he was still in the living room, completely absorbed in whatever game he was playing. But the way Richard was looking, it was like he'd seen something that wasn't there. Trying to keep my voice casual, I asked Richard what he was looking at, but my heart was already racing. He didn't answer right away. His eyes were wide, like he was trying to process something, but couldn't quite wrap his head around it. Finally, he shook his head and looked at me, his face pale. He asked me in a low voice if I heard anything. Confused, I questioned what he meant by that. He said he thought he had heard someone whispering something, but then decided it was just his imagination and told me to forget it. However, that word, whispering, it sent a jolt through me. My mind immediately flashed back to those nights when I'd heard it too, when I'd gone to the boy's room to find him huddled in the corner. But Richard hadn't been here for any of that. He didn't know about the whispers. I laughed it off, but I couldn't ignore the knot tightening in my stomach. I then awkwardly agreed that he must have imagined it. Even using a silly reason like the quietness of this place can play tricks on you. Richard nodded, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. He kept glancing toward the hallway, where the boy's room was, like he was waiting for something else to happen. The conversation died after that. We tried to keep talking, but the energy was all wrong. Richard was distracted, and I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. Eventually, he suggested we go into the living room to spend some time with the boy. I agreed, thinking it might break the tension. We sat down on the couch, watching the boy as he pushed the truck across the floor. It seemed like a normal enough moment, but there was this odd heaviness in the air. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like we weren't alone in the room. Like there was something or someone else there watching us. That's when Richard leaned over and whispered to me that he felt something was off with the boy. I glanced at the boy, my heart pounding. Then I asked him to explain what he meant. Richard hesitated, his eyes flicking to the boy and then back to me. Then he proceeded to skeptically say that it felt like the boy wasn't actually here. That's when the boy stopped playing. He didn't turn to look at us or say anything, but he just froze, the truck motionless in his hands. The room went completely silent, like the air had been sucked out of it. Richard and I exchanged a look, and I could see the unease written all over his face. There was something about the way the boy was sitting so still, so unnaturally still, that made my skin crawl. Richard cleared his throat, trying to sound casual as he checked up on the boy. The boy didn't respond. He didn't even move. It was like he hadn't heard him at all. I was just about to get up and check on him as well when the doorbell rang. It startled both of us. I hadn't been expecting anyone, and honestly, the sudden noise felt jarring after the eerie silence that had settled over the house. I went to the door, half expecting it to be a delivery or a neighbor, but when I opened it, no one was there. At least that's what I thought at first. I stepped outside, glancing around, but the street was empty. No cars, no people, just the wind rustling the trees. I was about to head back inside when I noticed something on the doorstep. A small, folded piece of paper. It hadn't been there before. I picked it up, unfolding it with shaky hands. The message inside was short, just a few words scrawled in messy handwriting. "You're not safe." That was it. No signature, no explanation. Just those 3 words, hanging in the air like a threat. I stood there for what felt like forever, trying to make sense of it. Was it a prank? Some kind of joke? But something about the note didn't feel like a joke. It just felt wrong, like it was meant for me. Like someone knew exactly what was going on in this house. When I went back inside, Richard could tell something was off. I showed him the note, and his reaction was exactly what I expected. Confusion mixed with fear. He suggested that we talk to a professional. Things were getting out of hand. I didn't argue. I knew he was right. Things were spiraling, and I had no idea how to stop it. But what happened next made me realize that whatever this was, it wasn't something I could just fix by calling a psychologist. Later that night, after Richard left, I put the boy to bed. He didn't say much, but that wasn't unusual. I checked the windows, locked the doors, and double-checked the locks. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us, and that note. It was burned into my mind. The words, "You're not safe," were all I could focus on. I went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. Every little sound made me jump. The creak of the floorboards, the rustle of the wind outside. I felt like I was waiting for something to happen, like the air itself was holding its breath. And then, around 2 a.m., I heard it. The front door. It wasn't loud, just the faintest sound of the handle turning. But I knew I had locked it. I knew it had been locked. I shot out of bed, heart pounding, and ran to the front door. It was still shut, still locked, but the air around it was cold. Freezing, actually. My breath fogged up in front of me as I stood there, staring at the door, trying to figure out what was happening. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were faint, coming from the hallway behind me. Slow, deliberate, like someone or something was walking toward me. But when I turned around, the hallway was empty. I stood there, frozen, listening to the sound of those footsteps growing louder and closer. But there was no one there. No one in the hallway and no one in the house. At least, no one I could see. I bolted back to the boy's room, half expecting to find him standing in the corner like he had been those other nights. But when I opened the door, he was sound asleep, curled up under the blankets, breathing softly. The footsteps stopped. I stood in the doorway, my heart racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. But there was no sense to be made. The house was quiet again, as if nothing had happened at all. But I knew better. Something had been in the house with me. Something had been watching. The next morning, I called Richard and I told him everything. I told him about the note, the footsteps, the cold air. I thought he'd tell me I was losing it, that I was letting my imagination run wild. But instead, he just listened. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, he spoke. He said that he believed me. From the moment he laid eyes on the boy, something felt wrong to him. I didn't need him to tell me that. I knew something was wrong. But what could I do about it? Every time I thought I had a plan, the situation would shift, twist in ways I couldn't predict. I couldn't even tell if the boy was involved or just another victim of whatever was happening. I've been looking over that note again and again, trying to figure out who could have left it, what it means. You're not safe. I don't know if they were talking about me or him. Maybe both. Maybe neither. Whatever this is, it's not stopping. It's getting worse. And I'm not sure how much longer I can keep pretending everything is okay. For now, I'll leave it here. I'm trying to figure out my next move, but I'll post again when I have more answers or if something stranger happens. If any of you have experienced something like this or have any other ideas, I'm all ears. Someone left a comment on my last post, mentioning they'd heard a story about something similar happening to someone they knew, about a child who came into a family's life, and strange, almost supernatural events started to unfold. At first, I didn't think too much of it. I mean, people say all kinds of things online, right? But the more I think about it, the more I realize that maybe, just maybe, I'm not the only one going through this. I haven't been able to shake the feeling that whatever's happening here isn't just in my head. It's like there's a thread connecting all of these strange occurrences, a thread I can't quite see, but I know it's there, pulling tighter with each passing day. And now, after what just happened, I'm convinced that something is terribly wrong. I've been watching him more closely. The boy, I mean. It's hard not to. Ever since the note appeared on my doorstep, I've been hyper aware of every little thing. The way he moves around the house, the way he looks at me, there's something off. I keep telling myself that it's just my imagination, that he's just a quiet kid dealing with a new environment, but I can't shake this feeling that there's more to it than that. Yesterday was different though. Yesterday, something happened that I can't explain. It started in the afternoon. I was in the living room, trying to relax after another sleepless night. Yeah, the nightmares haven't stopped. Then I noticed that the boy was nowhere to be seen. Normally, he stays within eyesight, playing with his toys or watching TV, but this time he had disappeared. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was in his room or in the kitchen getting a snack. But after a few minutes of silence, I started to get that familiar knot in my stomach. I called his name, but there was no answer. I checked his room, the kitchen, even the bathroom, but there was nothing. I was just about to panic when I heard a noise coming from the basement. Now, I haven't been down in the basement since I moved in, except to store a few boxes. It's not a place I ever spend much time, mostly because it's cold, damp, and frankly, a little creepy. But the sound was unmistakable. It was the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, like someone was pacing back and forth. I stood at the top of the basement stairs, listening, hoping that maybe it was just the house settling or the wind outside. But then I heard it again, louder this time. There was no mistaking it. Someone was down there. I don't know why, but my first thought was that the boy had somehow wandered into the basement and was just hanging out. But as I stood there, trying to convince myself that it was nothing, the air around me felt heavier. It felt like something was pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I called his name again, louder this time, but again, no answer. I grabbed the flashlight from the hall closet and descended the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. The sound of my own footsteps echoed off the stone walls, but I could still hear that soft, shuffling noise in the distance, like someone or something was moving around down there. When I reached the bottom, I swung the flashlight around, scanning the basement. It was empty. The boxes were still stacked in the corner, untouched, and there was no sign of the boy. But that didn't make sense. Where else could he have gone? And then I heard his voice. It came from the far corner of the basement, just beyond the reach of the flashlight's beam. It was quiet at first, almost like he was whispering to someone, but there was no one else there. My heart was pounding in my ears as I slowly moved toward the sound, trying to make out what he was saying. I called his name again, my voice shaking, but I received no response. In fact, it was like he didn't even acknowledge my existence. Then the whispering suddenly stopped, but the feeling in the air didn't. It was like the whole basement was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I took another step forward, and that's when I saw him. He was standing in the corner, facing the wall, his back to me. His arms hung limply at his sides, and he was completely still, not moving, not making a sound, just standing there. My flashlight flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. I could feel my pulse racing, my breath coming in short gasps. Something about the way he was standing, so still, so unnaturally quiet, made my skin crawl. I approached cautiously while quietly calling out to him, trying to see if he was okay. He didn't move. I stepped closer, reaching out to touch his shoulder, and that's when he turned around. I swear to God, what I saw still haunts me. His face. Got his face. His face was not the face I knew. His facial features were elongated and distorted. His bone structure was twisted and warped, and his skin was pale and old. It was like someone just grabbed his lower jaw and just kept pulling. And then there were his eyes. His eyes were black, completely black, like they had been hollowed out, void of any life or soul. But it wasn't just that. It was the way he looked at me. It was like he wasn't really seeing me, like I wasn't there. No, it was like it was trying to see into me, trying to read me. For a moment, I froze. I didn't know what to do. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. And then, without warning, he smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile a child should have. It was too wide, too forced, like his lips were being pulled back by invisible strings. And then he spoke. He spoke in the lowest and the raspiest voice I ever heard, saying, "She's here." My blood ran cold. Barely getting the words out, I weakly asked whatever I was encountering, "Who was here?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at me with that twisted grin on his face, his black eyes reflecting the beam of the flashlight. And then, without warning, it stopped. His eyes returned to normal, the grin disappeared, and he blinked, looking up at me like nothing had happened. Then, with his normal voice, he asked for a snack. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. I just stood there, staring at him, my heart racing, my hands shaking. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined the whole thing. Like, what the fuck did I even witness? Was the lack of sleep and the stress of everything finally catching up to me? But then, how do I explain what I saw and heard? Does stress lead you to hallucinate possessions? While I grappled with whether I had a grip on reality or not, he walked past me, heading up the stairs like nothing had happened, leaving me standing there in the dark. After a few minutes, I finally forced myself to move. I followed him upstairs, my mind racing, trying to rationalize what just happened. That night, of course, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the day over and over in my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, those black eyes, and that twisted grin. And I kept hearing his voice in my head. "She's here." Who was this she that things spoke of? The next morning, I tried to talk to him about it, but he didn't remember anything. Or at least he claimed he didn't. He acted like it was just another day, like nothing unusual had happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. That whatever had happened in the basement had left a mark on him. And on me. Later that day, I called Richard, the friend who had come over last time. I told him about the basement, about the black eyes, about the voice. He listened, but I could tell he was struggling to believe me. I don't blame him. If someone had told me this story, I probably wouldn't believe them either. But then something strange happened. As we were talking, Richard's voice cut out. At first, I thought it was just a bad connection, but when I called him back, he didn't answer. A few minutes later, he texted me saying that his phone had died. Except it wasn't his phone. He said that right before the call dropped, he heard a voice. A whisper. It said the same thing the boy had said in the basement. "She's here." Richard hasn't called me back since. Now, I'm at a loss. I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm losing control of the situation. This thing, whatever it is getting stronger. And the boy. Well, he's different. He was always a bit quiet and distant, but now it is much more extreme. And every time I look at him, I can't help but wonder if the thing I saw in the basement is still inside him. So, I'm asking for help. I don't know who else to turn to. If any of you have any experience with this kind of thing, if you've seen or heard anything like this before, please let me know. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending that everything's okay. Because it's not. And I need to figure out what's happening before it's too late. I'll post again if things develop further. Signing off. So, things have taken an even darker turn since my last post. I keep thinking about everything I've shared here and how I've been trying to make sense of it all. Your comments have been helpful, but now I feel like I'm standing on the edge of something I can't pull back from. I wasn't sure whether to post again, but I need to get this out. I need to write it all down before it consumes me completely. I've learned something. Something about the boy, and I don't think I'll ever be able to unlearn it. It all started with the nightmares. I told you before that I've been having them too, right? Well, they're getting worse. Much worse. They're no longer just creepy dreams. They're vivid, terrifying, and feel disturbingly real. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in the house, but it's twisted and distorted. The walls stretch, the floors creak, and the air is thick with this overwhelming sense of dread. I can hear footsteps, whispers, and that voice. The one that keeps saying she's here. But in the dreams, there's something else. Something I haven't told you yet. Every time I dream, I see the boy, but he's not alone. There's a woman with him, a shadowy figure with a presence that feels suffocating. She's always just out of reach, standing behind him, watching me. I've tried to get closer, tried to see her face, but every time I move toward her, she fades away, leaving me with this gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach. I didn't know what to make of it at first, but after what I discovered, I'm starting to piece it together. It was 3 days ago. I had finally decided to do something I hadn't done since I brought him home. Go through his things. I don't know why I hadn't done it earlier. Maybe I didn't want to invade his privacy, or maybe I was just afraid of what I'd find. But after everything that's happened, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling anymore. There had to be something. Some clue, some piece of information that could explain all of this. I waited until he was asleep. It was late, past midnight, and the house was eerily quiet. I crept into his room, my heart pounding in my chest, and went straight to the small suitcase he'd brought with him from the orphanage. It had been sitting in the corner of his room, untouched, ever since he arrived. I hadn't given it much thought, but now it felt like it was hiding something. Something important. I unzipped the suitcase, trying to keep my hands from shaking. Inside, there were only a few items: clothes, a pair of shoes, a small notebook. The clothes were unremarkable, just basic shirts and pants, nothing that stood out. But the notebook. That's what caught my attention. It was old, the edges worn and the cover frayed like it had been handled a lot. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it in my hands. There was something about it that felt unusually heavy. Not physically, but emotionally. Like it was holding more than just words. I opened it, my fingers trembling. The pages were filled with drawings that were crude, childlike sketches. At first, they seemed innocent enough. A house, some trees, and a few animals. But the further I flipped through, the darker they became. The animals started looking strange and distorted. Their eyes were too big, and their bodies twisted in unnatural ways. And then there were the people. In almost every drawing, there was a figure of a boy. I recognized him immediately. It was the boy, the same one I'd adopted. But in some of the drawings, there was a second figure, a woman. The woman from my dreams. She was always standing behind him, her face obscured by shadows, her hands resting on his shoulders. In some of the drawings, her fingers were long and thin like claws. In others, she was reaching out toward me, toward whoever was looking at the page. And in every single drawing, her eyes, they were black, just like the boys had been that night in the basement. I felt my stomach turn as I flipped through the rest of the notebook. The drawings got worse, more frantic, like whoever had made them had been in a hurry, desperate to get something down on paper. There were scribbled words next to some of the sketches, but they were hard to read. The handwriting was messy, almost like it had been written by someone in a state of panic. But I managed to make out a few words. "She's here." That same phrase. The one the boy had said in the basement, the one I'd heard in my dreams. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the notebook, trying to make sense of it all. But eventually I couldn't take it anymore. I closed the notebook, shoved it back into the suitcase, and left his room as quickly as I could without waking him up. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I made breakfast and went through the motions, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. I needed to know more. I needed to understand what the hell was happening. So I went back to the orphanage. I didn't tell them everything. I didn't want to seem crazy, but I asked more questions. I pressed them harder this time, trying to get them to tell me something they hadn't before. At first, they gave me the same answers as before, that there was nothing unusual about the boy, and that his history was a bit vague but not unheard of for children in the system. But when I mentioned the drawings, the woman behind the desk froze. She tried to brush it off, saying that many kids in the orphanage had traumatic pasts, and that sometimes they used art to express their emotions. But I could see it in her eyes. She knew something she wasn't telling me. I pushed harder, demanding to know more. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she sighed and leaned in closer. With her voice barely above a whisper, she said that there was something that happened. An incident, so to speak, but they didn't think it was important to share with future parents. She went on to explain that when the boy had first arrived at the orphanage, he hadn't come alone. There had been another child, a little girl. She was younger than him, maybe 5 or 6, but they had been inseparable. No one knew where they had come from or how they ended up at the orphanage, but they had arrived together, hand in hand. But the little girl didn't last long. She became sick shortly after arriving. Fever, coughing, the usual symptoms. The staff thought it was just a cold at first, but then she started talking about things, dark things. She told the staff that there was a woman who followed her and the boy everywhere they went, that she was always watching them. She said that the woman wanted to take them away. At first, they thought it was just a child's imagination, a way of coping with the trauma of being abandoned. But then the boy started drawing the woman too, those same drawings I'd found in his suitcase. The girl didn't get better. She got worse, and eventually she passed away in her sleep. The staff said it was pneumonia, something that happens sometimes with kids in group settings. But the boy had changed after that. He stopped talking about the woman. He stopped drawing her. But the staff couldn't shake the feeling that something was still with him, something dark. I left the orphanage feeling more confused and terrified than ever. The boy hadn't just come from nowhere. He had come from something I didn't understand, something I wasn't prepared for. That night, I decided to confront him. I didn't know what I was going to say or how I was going to say it, but I couldn't keep living in fear of what might happen next. I needed answers. I waited until after dinner when we were both sitting in the living room. The air felt thick like it always does when something's about to happen. I took a deep breath and turned to him. Trying to keep my voice steady, I told him about the drawings I found in his room. He didn't look at me. He just kept staring at the TV, his face blank. With my heart pounding in my chest, I told about how I knew the woman in the drawings had been following him. That's when he finally looked at me. His eyes weren't black this time. They were just his normal brown eyes. But there was something in them, something I hadn't seen before. Fear. Then he whispered, saying, "She's not gone. She never left." I felt my blood run cold. He continued in a voice barely audible, saying that the woman was here and was watching. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. I just sat there, staring at him, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do with that information? How was I supposed to protect him or protect myself from something I couldn't even see? Now, I'm sitting here, typing this out, trying to make sense of it all, but I can't. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to stop this. All I know is that she's here and she's not going away. I'm asking for help. If anyone has any idea what's going on, if anyone has dealt with something like this before then, for the love of God, please, let me know. I don't know how much longer I can go on. I'm scared for both of us, and I don't know how to fix it. Signing off. I'm not sure where to begin with this one. Since my last post, the haunting has intensified in ways I didn't think were possible. It's not just the boy anymore. It's the house, the air, the space around me. Everything just feels so wrong. Something dark is closing in, suffocating me, and I can do nothing to stop it. I should have known things were going to escalate. After the conversation with the boy, when he told me that woman was here, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was haunting him had fully rooted itself here. But I didn't expect it to manifest the way it did. I didn't expect it to start unraveling everything around me. Let me try to explain, though I'm not sure if I can do it justice. It's all so surreal, and putting it into words makes me feel like I'm reliving it again. The first thing that happened after my last post was the cold. I noticed it the very next day. It wasn't just a chilly breeze or a draft from an open window. It was bone deep, like the temperature had dropped by 20 degrees inside the house. I turned up the heat, but it didn't make a difference. No matter how warm I tried to make it, the cold stayed. It followed me from room to room, and the worst part was, it was concentrated around the boy. I'd find him sitting in the living room, his breath visible in the freezing air, but he wouldn't seem to notice. It was like the cold didn't bother him at all, like he was completely numb to it. But for me, it was unbearable. I had to wear layers just to stay warm inside my own house, and even then, I couldn't shake the chill that had settled into my bones. And it wasn't just the temperature that was out of whack. Things started moving like in Poltergeist. At first, it was small stuff. Things I could brush off as absent-mindedness. A cup was left on the counter when I swore I'd put it in the sink. A book that had fallen off the shelf. Little things like that. But then it escalated. One night I woke up to the sound of something crashing downstairs. It was loud. It sounded like furniture being overturned, and it jolted me out of bed. My heart was racing as I grabbed a flashlight and crept downstairs, half expecting to find an intruder. But when I got to the living room, it was empty. The furniture was intact, nothing seemed out of place. But the air was heavy, like it had been disturbed by something that wasn't there anymore. Then I heard it, that eerie whisper. It was faint, barely audible, but I could feel it more than I could hear it. It was coming from the corner of the room, the same corner where I'd found the boy huddled during those first few nights. But this time, it wasn't him. It was something else. I shone the flashlight into the corner, but there was nothing there. Just uneasy darkness. I called out for the boy, thinking maybe he was sleepwalking again. But when I checked his room, he was sound asleep in his bed, peacefully and unbothered, like nothing had happened. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat in the living room, watching the shadows on the walls, waiting for something, anything, to happen again. But the rest of the night passed in silence, and I was left with nothing but my own thoughts. The next day, things got even stranger. I had mentioned that the boy had been distant ever since he arrived here, but boy did that escalate. Before, he would at least utter a few sentences or let me know when he was hungry or wanted to watch TV. Now, He doesn't want to talk, period. He doesn't want to play, doesn't want to eat, or do anything except sit in his room, staring at the walls. I tried to engage with him, tried to get him to open up, but he just stared at me with those big, empty eyes. And then there was the cat, Ziggy. I haven't mentioned him much in these posts, but he's always been a constant in the house. Usually he's aloof, keeping to himself and only coming around when he wants food or attention. But lately he's also been acting strange. Well, stranger than a cat normally would anyway. He won't go near the boy. In fact, he avoids him like the plague. Anytime the boy gets too close, Ziggy hisses, his fur standing on end, and bolts to another room. It's like he can sense something that I can't. And that's not the worst part. I found Ziggy in the basement 2 nights ago. He was dead. There were no signs of injury, no explanation for what had happened. He was just lying there, cold and stiff, like something had drained the life out of him. I don't know how long he had been down there, but the sight of him sent a wave of nausea through me. I buried him in the backyard, but even now, I can't shake the feeling that it wasn't natural. I know in the pit of my stomach that she, that unwelcomed woman, had done it. It's like she's trying to strip away everything that brings comfort, everything that makes this place feel like home. After Ziggy, things escalated quickly. The cold got worse. It started to creep into every corner of the house, and no amount of heat could fight it off. It was like the house itself was rejecting warmth, like it was being swallowed by something dark and unrelenting. The noises became constant. Footsteps. The whispering. The sound of furniture being dragged across the floor. Things I couldn't explain, things that happened when I wasn't looking. I'd leave a room and come back to find chairs moved, pictures on the wall tilted at odd angles, lights flickering on and off. It was relentless, and it was driving me mad. But the worst was the boy. All emotion was gone. His eyes were vacant, like he was not really there anymore. I've tried talking to him, asking him if he's okay, but all he ever said was, "She's here." I don't know who she is. I don't know what she wants. But I can feel her, hovering over us, watching, waiting for something. And I'm scared. Scared that whatever she's here for, it's getting closer. Yesterday, I caught him standing in the middle of the living room, staring at the corner again. That same damn corner. But this time, he was talking to it, whispering. I couldn't make out what he was saying at first, but as I got closer, I heard him. He was talking to her. His voice was soft, almost like he was having a conversation with someone only he could see. I called out to him, trying to snap him out of it, but he didn't respond. He just kept whispering, his eyes wide, locked on that dark corner. And then, without warning, he turned to me. His eyes, they weren't his. They were black, like the last time in the basement. Empty, soulless. His voice, now hollow, echoed the following. "She's not leaving here." I froze. I didn't know what to do, what to say. I just stood there, my heart racing, my mind screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. He continued chanting those words as his soulless gaze pierced me. Then, just as quickly as it had started, it stopped. His eyes returned to normal, and he blinked at me, confused. This was followed by his usual request for food. I didn't know how to respond. I just nodded, trying to keep my composure, and made him dinner. But the whole time, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. I don't know how to fight something I can't see. I don't know how to protect him from whatever this is. And I don't know how much longer I can stay in this house. The nights are the worst. The cold is unbearable, and the noises are constant. I've tried staying awake, tried keeping the lights on, but it doesn't matter. She's here, and she's not going anywhere. I can feel her getting stronger. Every day, every night, she's taking more. The boy, He's slipping away, and I don't know how to bring him back. I've tried looking for help, but I don't even know where to start. The orphanage doesn't have any more answers, and I can't exactly call in a paranormal expert without sounding like a lunatic. I'm trapped, and I don't know what to do. I keep thinking about what you all said in the comments. Some of you mentioned that this might be a possession, that the boy could be a vessel for something darker. I didn't want to believe it at first, but now, I'm not so sure. Whatever this is, it's not going away. It's not going to stop. I don't know how much longer I can take this. The boy is slipping away, and I'm afraid I'm next. Signing off. I don't even know why I'm still posting this. I mean, why the fuck am I sitting here typing? Why am I sharing this with strangers, with people who are probably reading this for cheap thrills, or maybe out of some morbid curiosity? I don't fucking know. Maybe I'm doing it because it's the only thing that makes sense right now, the only thing keeping me tethered to something real. Or maybe I've already lost it. Maybe I'm typing because if I stop, if I let go, then everything that's happened will hit me all at once, and I'll finally break. Maybe this is the only way I can pretend I'm still in control. But the funny thing is, I'm not in fucking control. I never was. And now, as if things couldn't get any worse, someone is dead. Yeah, you read that right. Someone is fucking dead, and it's because of that thing. I tried. I tried to figure it out, tried to stop it, but I couldn't. And now there's no turning back. So I guess this is my confession. Or maybe it's just me screaming into the void. Either way, this is what happened. This is how it all went to shit. It started 2 nights ago. Or was it 3? I don't even know anymore. Time doesn't make sense in this house, not since she started creeping into every corner, every crack in the walls. It's like the air is thick with her now, like she's seeped into the very foundation of this place. And as for the boy, well, he's not even the same kid anymore. Hell, I don't even know if he's still in there. Anyway, the night I'm talking about was quiet. Too fucking quiet. The kind of quiet that feels wrong, like the silence is just waiting for something to break. I was sitting in the living room again, just staring at the walls, I guess. The house was dark, except for the faint glow from the streetlights outside, and the cold was worse than ever. It felt like I was sitting in a freezer, my breath fogging up in front of me. But the boy? He was upstairs. Sleeping, I thought. Or maybe just pretending to sleep. I don't know anymore. Then came a knock at the door. Not a loud, frantic knock, but a soft, steady tapping. Like someone was there, but they didn't want to disturb me too much. It was weird. Nobody comes to my house, especially not this late. My first thought was, who the hell would be out in this cold? My second thought was, why am I even thinking about opening the door? But I did. I got up, crossed the room, and opened the door. And Richard was standing there. Yeah, Richard. The same friend I told you about before, the one who came by to help me figure things out. The one who heard the whispers and saw the boy acting weird. He looked rough. His face was pale, his eyes wide and bloodshot like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were rumpled like he'd been wearing the same thing for days on end. In a low voice, he greeted me and asked if he could come in. I don't know why, but I hesitated. Something about the way he was standing there, the way his eyes darted around the doorway like he was expecting something to jump out at him, made me nervous. But I let him in. Because what else was I supposed to do? He stepped inside, rubbing his hands together to warm them up. The second he crossed the threshold, though, I swear the temperature in the room dropped even more. It was like the cold followed him inside, like it clung to him, wrapping around his body like a shroud. Closing the door behind him, I angrily asked what he was doing here. He didn't answer me right away. He just stood there, staring at the floor, his breath fogging up in the cold air. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. With a voice barely above a whisper, he explained that he was here to warn me about something terrible. Confused, I asked him to elaborate further. He looked up at me then, and the expression on his face. God, I don't even know how to describe it. It was like he was looking at me, but also looking through me, like I wasn't even there. He went on to say that some entity, a woman, had apparently been following him ever since he left my house. The second he said that, my stomach dropped. I knew exactly who he was talking about. I didn't even have to ask. I could feel her too, hovering over us, watching from the shadows. Meekly, I asked him what he meant when he said she was following him. Of course, I had some idea about what he meant, but I was curious as to whether he was experiencing the same things I was. He didn't answer. He just walked over to the couch and sat down, his head in his hands. He looked like he was falling apart, like the weight of whatever was haunting him was crushing him from the inside out. Then he started telling me about his experience, about the constant whispers and how he can't sleep because of her constant gaze. He said she was waiting for him to grow weak, for him to slip up. I didn't know what to say. I mean, how do you even respond to something like that? I thought I was the one losing my mind, but now, seeing him like this, it was like I was looking into my own future, like I was seeing what was going to happen to me if I didn't figure this shit out. And then he said something that made my blood run cold. He thought she was going to kill him. That was it. That was the moment I knew we were fucked. There was no getting out of this. Not for him, not for me, not for the boy. She had her hooks in us, and she wasn't going to let go. I tried to get more out of him, tried to understand what exactly had been happening to him since he left, but he wouldn't say much more. He just kept repeating the same thing over and over. She's here. She's always here. Eventually, I told him to stay the night. I didn't want him leaving, not in the state he was in. I figured we could talk more in the morning, try to come up with a plan, maybe figure out how to stop whatever this was. But there wasn't a morning. Not for Richard. I don't know what time it was when it happened. All I know is that I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, like someone was walking around downstairs. At first I thought it was Richard, but then I remembered how fucked up he'd been the night before. He wouldn't be wandering around the house like that, not in his state. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and crept out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps were getting louder, moving toward the living room. I could feel that same heavy, oppressive air pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. When I got to the living room, the first thing I saw was the boy. He was standing in the corner, his back to me, his head slightly tilted to one side, like he was listening to something only he could hear. But that wasn't what stopped me in my tracks. It was Richard. He was lying on the floor, his body twisted at an unnatural angle, his eyes wide open and staring up at the ceiling. There was blood. So much blood. It was pooling around his head, soaking into the carpet. His mouth was open in a silent scream, and his hands were covered in it, covered in his own blood. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't think. All I could do was stare at him, my mind screaming at me to do something, but my body refusing to cooperate. And then the boy turned around. His eyes were black again, just like they'd been in the basement. Just like they'd been the other night when he told me she wasn't leaving. With a calm voice, the boy told me he did it. He said that the woman told him to, and that it was Richard's time. That was when I lost it. I don't even remember what happened after that. I think I screamed. I think I grabbed him, tried to shake him, tried to get him to tell me why the fuck he'd done this, why she had made him do it. But he didn't answer. He just stood there, his eyes black as night, staring at me like I was nothing, like I wasn't even human. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually I called the police. I told them. Fuck, I don't even remember what I told them. Something about an accident. Something about Richard slipping and falling. I don't know. I don't fucking know. They came. They took him away. They took Richard's body away. But they didn't take her. She's still here. I can feel her. Watching. Waiting. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to stop this. Richard is dead, and it's because of me. Because I let this happen. Because I let her in. I think I'm next. I don't even know why I'm posting this. Maybe because I have nothing left. Maybe because it doesn't matter anymore. Richard is dead. My friend is dead. What the fuck do I do now? So I have realized that I don't even know who the fuck I am anymore. Oh, by the way, I'm still alive and still posting. Honestly, I don't even know why I still bother posting. It's not like any of this shit matters. I keep spilling my guts to strangers on the internet like it's supposed to help. Does it make me feel better? Fuck if I know. I guess it's better than sitting in the dark, listening to the whispers, waiting for the next thing to happen. I mean, I'm freezing to death in my own home, and that thing is always there, just watching me. You want to know something? I don't think I've slept in days or weeks. I don't know. Time means nothing now. It's all a blur. I don't even remember what normal feels like. My mind is slipping. I can feel it unraveling piece by piece, and I don't care anymore. Let it unravel. Let it fall apart. I saw Richard die. His body still in my head, twisted, broken, covered in blood. The boy did it. No, that's not right. It was the woman who did it. But I can't get it out of my head, the way his eyes stared up at me like he knew something I didn't. Like he saw something in that final moment that I was not ready to see yet. And maybe I never will be. Maybe I'll die without understanding any of this. Maybe that's the way it's supposed to be. I haven't been able to leave the house since it happened. The police took Richard's body away, they questioned me, and I lied. Of course I fucking lied. What was I supposed to say? That a kid killed him because he's possessed by some goddamn demon woman who's been haunting my house for weeks. They'd lock me up. Maybe they should have. Maybe that would have been better than this. But I lied, and they believed me. They thought it was an accident. I made it sound like a tragic, terrible accident. And now Richard's dead, and it's on me. His blood is on my hands, and it's not coming off. After the police left, I thought I could pull myself together. I thought I could maybe find a way out of this mess. But the second I was alone, the house came alive again. The whispers came back. The cold, the shadows, the feeling that something's always right behind me, breathing down my neck. And the boy, he just sits there. He's quiet now, too quiet. Like he's waiting for something. Or maybe I'm the one waiting. I just don't know. I haven't been able to look at him the same since Richard died. Every time I see his face, I remember those black eyes, that twisted smile. And the worst part, he doesn't even seem to remember what happened. Or maybe he does, and he's just fucking with me. I can't tell anymore. I don't trust him. I don't trust anyone. Yesterday, or at least I think it was yesterday, I finally snapped. I don't even remember what set me off. Maybe it was the way the boy was sitting there, staring at the wall, completely emotionless. Maybe it was the whispers, the constant fucking whispers that never leave me alone. Or maybe it was just the weight of everything that's happened pressing down on me, suffocating me, until I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed him. I fucking grabbed him by the shoulders and shook him, harder than I should have. I don't know what I expected to happen. Maybe I thought I could shake the demon out of him, or get him to say something, anything, that would make this all make sense. But he didn't react. He just stared at me with those big, empty eyes, like he wasn't even there. Like he's not even real anymore. I screamed at him. I don't even know what I said. Something about Richard, about the blood, about the whispers. I don't know. It was all a blur. And the whole time, he just stared at me, silent, unmoving. And then, out of nowhere, he smiled. That fucking smile. It was the same smile he had when Richard died, the same twisted grin that stretched across his face like someone was pulling his skin too tight. And I knew, right then and there, that he wasn't the boy anymore. He hasn't been the boy for a long time. He's just something else now. Something wearing his skin, using him like a puppet. I let go of him and backed away, my hands shaking. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was going to pass out. The room started spinning, and I had to sit down before I collapsed. I couldn't even look at him. I couldn't stand to see that smile, those black eyes staring back at me. After that, everything went dark. I don't remember what happened next. Maybe I blacked out. Maybe I just lost time. It's been happening a lot lately. I'll wake up in the middle of the night, covered in sweat, my heart pounding, and I won't remember how I got there. I won't remember what I dreamed about. But I know it's always the same. It's always her. She's everywhere now. I see her in the shadows, in the corners of my vision. I hear her voice in the back of my mind, whispering things I can't quite make out. And the boy? He's just sitting there, waiting for something. I don't know what, but I know it's coming. I can feel it in my bones. Something's coming, and when it gets here, there won't be anything left of me, or him, or this house, or anything. There was a moment, a few nights ago. At least I think it was a few nights ago, when I thought I could leave. I thought I could just walk out the door, leave everything behind, and never look back. I even packed a bag. I grabbed my keys, opened the front door, and stepped outside. But the second I crossed that threshold, the air changed drastically. It was like walking into a wall of ice. The cold hit me so hard, I could barely move. And then I heard the sound of her voice. It wasn't the whispers, but something else. Something louder, angrier. It was coming from inside the house, from behind me. I turned around and I saw her. She was standing in the doorway, staring at me. Her face was twisted, contorted into something inhuman, something monstrous. Her eyes were black, like the boy's, but there was something behind them. Something ancient, something hungry. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. It was like she was daring me to leave, daring me to try and escape. I couldn't do it. I couldn't leave. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm already too far gone. Maybe it's because I'm already hers. I closed the door and went back inside. Since then, I haven't left the house. I can't. I'm trapped here with her and the boy, and the walls are closing in. The whispers are louder now, almost deafening. They're in every room, every hallway, even in my own head. I can't think straight. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I just sit here, waiting for whatever comes next. I tried calling for help. I tried reaching out to someone, anyone, but no one answered. The phone doesn't work. The internet barely works. It's like I'm cut off from the world, like this house exists in its own little pocket of reality, separate from everything else. And I think that's exactly what she wants. She's isolating me, keeping me here until there's nothing left. The boy barely speaks anymore. When he does, It's always the same chant. She's here, she's waiting, she's not fucking leaving. I don't even know who he's talking to. Me? Her? Himself? It doesn't matter. None of it matters anymore. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about Richard. About the way he looked when I found him. About the blood, the way it soaked into the carpet, the way it clung to my hands when I tried to move him. I keep seeing his face, staring up at me with those dead eyes like he was trying to tell me something. But the thing is, I think he knew. I think he knew what was happening long before I did. I think he knew she was coming for him, and he came here anyway. Maybe he thought he could stop it. Maybe he thought he could help me. But he was wrong. And now he's dead, and I'm still here. Why? Why the fuck am I still here? Why didn't she take me too? What's the point of any of this? I don't have answers. I don't have anything. All I know is that I'm not the same person I was before. I'm not the man who adopted that boy. I'm not the man who tried to figure all of this out. I'm something else now. Something broken. Something twisted. Something that is hers. I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know how this ends. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe I'll just keep posting, keep typing these words into the void until there's nothing left to say. Or maybe this is the last post. Maybe this is the last time you'll hear from me. I don't care anymore. I don't care about anything. The boy, the house, the whispers, her. It's all the same now. It's all one big nightmare that I can't wake up from. Sorry if this sounded more like a madman's rant, but I'm just tired. I'm just so fucking tired. And I don't know how to make it all stop. I'm sure many of you probably got a kick out of this, right? Just sitting there, watching my life unravel like it's some kind of twisted show. Does my fucked up situation entertain you? Is that what this is about? Well, who am I to disappoint? The show must go on. And tonight I got a treat for you sick fucks. So, get this. I finally did it. I finally confronted her. Or maybe she confronted me. I'm not even sure anymore. All I know is that it happened, and now everything's different. Everything's broken. I should have known it was leading to this. I should have fucking known. I've been writing about the whispers, the shadows, the way she's been creeping into my mind, and I've just been sitting here like a goddamn fool, thinking I could figure it out. Thinking I could beat her. But there's no beating her. There never was. This whole thing has been one long, slow descent into the inevitable. And I walked right into it. Let me start from the beginning, or at least the beginning of the end. It was 3 days ago. No, maybe 4. Hell, I don't know. Time doesn't work right in this place anymore. It was nighttime though. That much I remember. The house was quiet. Too fucking quiet. The boy was in his room, or at least I thought he was. I couldn't stand looking at him anymore. Not after everything that's happened. His face, those black eyes, they haunt me, even when he's not around. The cold had gotten worse. I know I've mentioned it before, but this time, it was like the air itself had frozen solid. I could see my breath, my fingers were numb, and every corner of the house was filled with this thick, oppressive silence. I should have left. I should have fucking walked out that door and never looked back. But I didn't. I couldn't. Something kept me here. Maybe it was her. Maybe it was him. Maybe I'm just that stupid. Anyway, I was sitting in the living room, trying to focus on anything but the silence when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from upstairs. My heart started pounding in my chest because I knew it wasn't the boy. I knew it was her. I didn't want to go up there. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to stay put, to pretend I didn't hear it, but I couldn't ignore it. Not anymore. So, like the fucking idiot I am, I grabbed a flashlight and headed up the stairs. The steps creaked beneath my feet, echoing in the stillness, and the closer I got to the boys' room, the more I could feel it. The cold. The presence. Her. She was waiting for me. I could feel her watching, her eyes burning into my back, but I couldn't see her. Not yet. I reached the boys' room and stopped outside the door. My hand was shaking as I reached for the doorknob, but I forced myself to open it. And there he was, sitting on the edge of the bed, just like always. His back was to me, his head tilted slightly to one side, like he was listening to something only he could hear. I stepped into the room, my flashlight shaking in my hand, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. I asked the boy where the woman was as I inched closer to him. He didn't answer. Hell, he didn't even move. He just sat there, perfectly still, staring at the wall. The air in the room was so cold, it hurt to breathe. I stepped closer, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. Getting annoyed, I demanded the boy tell me where she was. Hearing my tone, he turned to look at me. His eyes weren't black this time. They were normal. Just his regular brown eyes, staring at me with this strange, almost sad expression. He looked different, like he was himself again, just for a moment. But I knew it wasn't real. I knew she was still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for her moment. He quietly said with a somber tone that she was always here and she never leaves. And then, just like that, his eyes turned black. That horrible, soulless black. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat, and before I could react, the door slammed shut behind me. The room plunged into darkness. I spun around, trying to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. My heart was racing, my hands shaking, and the whispers. They were louder than ever. At this point, are they even whispers? Anyway, I could feel her. I could feel her in the room with me, closing in, suffocating me with her presence. I yelled for her to get the fuck out of here. But the whisper yells didn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent, filling my head with 1,000 voices, all speaking at once. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The room was spinning, the shadows twisting and writhing like they were alive. And then I saw her. She was standing in the corner of the room, her figure barely visible in the darkness. But I knew it was her. I knew it the second I laid eyes on her. She wasn't human. She wasn't anything I could understand. Her face was twisted, contorted into something monstrous, her eyes black as night, and her smile. God, that horrible, twisted smile was the same one I'd seen on the boy. I felt my knees buckle beneath me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat closed up, and I was choking, gasping for air as she stepped closer, her footsteps slow and deliberate, just like before. Somehow I managed to choke out the words, "I know who you are and I know what you want," as she drew closer to me. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. The room was freezing, the air thick with her hatred, her rage. I could feel it seeping into my skin, into my mind, twisting me, breaking me. But I wasn't going to let her win. Not this time. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was adrenaline, or maybe it was desperation, but something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let her take me. I wasn't going to let her take the boy. I wasn't going to be her fucking puppet anymore. I lunged at her. I know it sounds insane. I know it sounds fucking crazy, but I didn't care. I threw myself at her, swinging my fists, screaming at the top of my lungs. But the second I touched her, the world went dark. Everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor in the hallway outside the boys' room. My head was pounding, my body aching like I'd been hit by a truck. I had no idea how I got there, no memory of what had happened after I attacked her. But I knew one thing: she was still there. I could feel her. I could feel her inside me, crawling under my skin, whispering in my mind. And I knew, no matter what I did, no matter how hard I fought, she wasn't going to stop. She wasn't going to leave. I got up, my legs shaking, and stumbled down the stairs. The house was silent again, but it wasn't the kind of silence that brought peace. It was the silence of a predator waiting for its prey to make a move, waiting for the right moment to strike. I don't know why I went into the basement. Maybe I thought I could find something down there. Some clue, some answer, something that would help me fight her. Or maybe I was just looking for a place to hide. I don't know, the boy always went there, so why not right? But when I got down there, I found the boy. He was sitting in the corner, just like always, his eyes black, his face pale and expressionless. And next to him was Richard. Yeah, fucking Richard. He was just there, sitting next to the boy, staring at me with those dead, glassy eyes. His body was twisted and broken, just like the last time I saw him, but he was alive, or something close to it. I froze. My heart stopped in my chest, and for a moment, I thought I was going to pass out. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could do was stare at the impossible sight in front of me. The boy then spoke up to tell me that she was waiting for me. I backed away, my head spinning, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I couldn't do this. I couldn't fucking do this anymore. But before I could run, before I could get the hell out of that basement, I heard her voice. It said I couldn't leave. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was a command. A statement of fact. I wasn't going anywhere. I was hers now. I always had been. The room started spinning, the walls closing in, and I fell to my knees. I don't know how long I was down there, curled up on the cold, hard floor, but eventually I managed to crawl my way back up the stairs. And now I'm here, writing this, telling you everything. Because that's all I have left. I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know if I'll survive the night or if she'll finally take me. But I do know one thing. She's not done with me. Not yet anyway. I can hear her now. She's coming. This is it. The end of the road. The final scream into the void. And you're all still here, aren't you? Reading, wondering what comes next, like you've been doing this whole time. You followed every word, every twist, every fucking dark corner of my life like you were watching some horror show unfold in real time. But guess what? You wanted a grand finale? Well, here it is. Let me lay it out for you, because I'm not pulling any punches now. This is the truth, the raw, unfiltered end. It's all over. Or maybe it's just beginning. It happened last night. Or was it the night before? Hell, it could have been a month ago, for all I know. Time is meaningless now. Every second in this house bleeds into the next, like ink spreading across a page, blotting out any sense of reality. But I remember what happened. I remember every fucking detail. The night started like all the others, cold, silent, and oppressive. The weight of her presence came crashing down on me. And what of the boy, you ask? Well, he was doing the usual. Just sitting in that same spot in the corner of the living room, staring at the wall like a puppet with its strings cut. As for what I was doing when shit started, nothing too adventurous. I was just on the couch, staring at nothing, just waiting for the next horrible thing to happen. I knew it was coming. I could feel it. But this time, something was different. The house was alive. So alive, in fact, that I could hear it breathing. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the walls. It wasn't just the house settling, it was her. She was in every fucking atom of this place, and she was making her move. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was the fear. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe I'd finally lost my mind. But I stood up, walked over to the boy, and grabbed him by the shoulders. Barely holding my voice together, I exclaimed that we are ending this shit right fucking now. The boy didn't respond. He just blinked, his soulless black eyes reflecting the dim light from the street outside. He looked through me like I was nothing, like I didn't exist. But I didn't care. I wasn't doing this for him anymore. I was doing it for me. I was going to take her down or die trying. I grabbed a flashlight, the only weapon I had, and marched to the basement door. The boy followed me without a word. I don't even remember him getting up. He was just there like a shadow at my back. We descended into the basement together, the darkness swallowing us whole. The basement, where it all started, where she first made herself known. I don't know what I was expecting when we got down there, but I knew it would be bad. The air was thick, heavy with the stench of rot and decay. My breath fogged in front of me as I scanned the room, searching for her, for any sign that she was there. But it wasn't her I saw first. It was Richard, the poor bastard. He was sitting in the corner, just like before, his twisted, broken body slumped against the wall, his eyes wide open and dead. But this time, he moved. His head snapped toward me, his lifeless eyes locking onto mine, and for a moment, I thought I was going to collapse right there. But I didn't. I couldn't. Richard then croaked the words, "She's coming." I felt the cold ripple down my spine, and I knew he was right. She was coming. She was already here. I turned around, and there she was. No longer just a shadow, no longer just a whisper in the dark. She stood before me, her form towering, her face twisted and grotesque, her black eyes filled with hatred. Her skin was stretched tight over her bones, her mouth pulled into that same horrific grin that haunted my every waking moment. And when she spoke, her voice was like nails scraping across my brain. With a hiss, she questioned if I thought I could fight or escape her. I didn't respond. What was there to say? She was right. I had thought I could fight her. I'd been wrong. She went on to say that I was hers and will always be hers as she stepped closer with her eyes boring into mine. My hand tightened around the flashlight, my last pathetic defense, but I knew it was useless. There was no fighting her. There never had been. And then, without warning, the boy stepped forward. He walked past me, his black eyes locked on hers, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw fear in her expression. She growled, and with her voice shaking, she rejected the boy's advance. But the boy kept walking, his small, pale figure moving toward her like he wasn't afraid of her at all, like he'd been waiting for this moment. Shocked, confused, and still very afraid, I yelled at the boy to stop and explain what he was doing, but the boy didn't answer. He just kept walking. And then he touched her. It was like the world exploded. The second his hand made contact with her, the basement was filled with this blinding light. So bright, I had to shield my eyes. The air vibrated with this intense, bone-rattling sound, like 1,000 voices screaming all at once. I felt my body being torn apart, piece by piece, every cell screaming in agony. And through it all, I could hear her shrieking, her voice echoing through the walls, through my skull, like she was being ripped from reality itself. I don't know how long it lasted. It could have been seconds. It could have been hours. But when the light finally faded, I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. The boy was gone. And so was she. I should have felt relieved. I should have felt like I'd finally won. But I didn't. Because I knew. I knew it wasn't over. She was still here. Not in the house. Not in the walls. But in me. I could feel her, crawling inside my head, her whispers slithering through my thoughts, infecting every part of me. She wasn't gone. She was never gone. She was just waiting, watching. And now that the boy was gone, she had me all to herself. And here's the kicker. The part that's going to fuck you up real good. Do you want to know why I've been posting all of this? Why I've been spilling my guts to all of you over and over again like some kind of sick confessional? It's because she wanted me to. Yeah, that's right. Every single word I've typed, every post I've made. Well, it wasn't me, it was her. She's been using me, using this to spread herself, to infect you. You're all part of it now. You've been reading, following along, getting closer and closer to the truth, and now you're trapped. Just like me. Every click, every like, every comment, you've let her in. And now she's with you, watching, waiting. I can feel her laughing inside my head as I type this. She's won. She's always been one step ahead of me, and now she's one step ahead of you. So congratulations. You're part of the story now. You're part of her. Don't bother trying to delete this. Don't bother trying to forget. It won't work. She's already in your mind, just like she's in mine. And soon, you'll hear the whispers too. You'll feel the cold creeping in. You'll see her in the shadows, waiting for you to slip, waiting for you to give in. And when you do, when you finally give up, she'll take you too. Just like she took me. For more chilling stories, like and subscribe.